Welcome to the channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and press the bell icon to stay updated with every new story. Cops shave black general woman's hair, unaware she is a highly decorated U.S. military general. They thought she was just another woman they could humiliate, just another victim to strip of dignity under the flashing lights of their authority. But the moment their clippers grazed her scalp, tearing away her crown of pride, the entire world shifted because the woman they mocked, the woman they violated, was not ordinary. She was General Sarah Mitchell, a highly decorated U.S. military general whose medals told stories of courage, sacrifice, and victories carved in fire and blood across foreign battlefields. What happened next shook an entire city, ignited headlines across America and the UK, and reminded every soul watching never to underestimate the silent power standing right before them. And before we dive into this unforgettable truth-to-life drama, know that stories like this raw, shocking, and transformative are the kind that reshape nations and awaken sleeping consciences to the cost of unchecked authority. The night had not yet swallowed the small suburban town of Riverside, but the street lamps glowed dimly like dying stars, casting long orange shadows across the quiet road as a light summer breeze rattled the leaves of tall oak trees that lined the sidewalks like silent sentinels. And in that strange silence that settles over American suburbs after dark, a single woman walked tall and commanding. Though dressed in nothing more than a plain dark green t-shirt and fitted black pants, carrying with her the invisible air of someone who belonged to no one and feared nothing, yet was clearly underestimated by every passerby who glanced her way without truly seeing. She was black, her skin glowing rich bronze under the amber streetlight, her high-bun hairstyle neatly tied like she was always ready for battle, each strand perfectly arranged with military precision. And though she had seen wars rage across desert sands, witnessed blood soak foreign soil, and counted tears shed over fallen comrades, she walked this peaceful night like any ordinary civilian, blending seamlessly into the fabric of suburban normalcy, hiding her extraordinary past in plain sight. Because after 23 years of leading soldiers across oceans, commanding respect in war rooms where generals plotted the fate of nations, and earning ribbons that told stories of heroism most people could never comprehend, she now walked these quiet civilian streets, simply trying to reconnect with ordinary life, to remember what peace felt like beneath her boots. Never imagining that before the clock struck midnight on this seemingly innocent evening, she would be dragged into the ugliest, most degrading side of American policing, becoming the unwilling center of a storm that would expose the rotting heart of systemic racism and abuse of power. From across the narrow residential road, 3 police officers, all white, all young, all infected with the kind of arrogance that comes from years of unchecked authority, watched her measured steps with narrowed, suspicious eyes, whispering among themselves in voices thick with assumption and prejudice. They mistook her quiet confidence for street defiance, mistook her decorated military past for complete insignificance, mistook her thoughtful silence for the weakness they expected to find in every black woman who dared walk alone after dark in their territory. And as their heavy boots struck the cracked pavement with deliberate menace, they moved toward her with the familiar swagger of men who believed their shining badges gave them divine ownership over the night and everyone who dared breathe within it. General Sarah Mitchell, though no living soul in that moment knew her true rank or the weight of responsibility that rested on her battle-scarred shoulders, stopped walking, her head tilting slightly to the left as if she had already read this particular battlefield with the tactical precision of someone who had survived ambushes in Afghanistan and coordinated rescue missions in hostile territory. As if she had already calculated the next 30 moves in this dangerous game, mapped every possible outcome, and prepared her mind for whatever ugliness was about to unfold. But her calculated stillness, her warrior's patience, was not understood by those who approached her with malicious intent, for in their small, poisoned minds, she was just another black woman walking alone through their domain, just another convenient target for their misguided, racist show of authority and dominance. and they closed in on her like predators sensing easy prey, with cruel smirks tugging at their thin lips, one muttering under his breath, "Let's check her out real good. She looks suspicious as hell," while another chuckled with the nasty sound of a schoolyard bully about to corner a smaller, defenseless child for his own twisted amusement. The general's broad chest rose and fell slowly, her breathing controlled and measured the exact same way she had learned to breathe in active war zones when enemy explosions cracked like thunder in the distance, and desperate men screamed coordinates into static-filled radios. Yet here in her own homeland, on the streets she had sworn to protect, the immediate danger was not hidden in foreign desert sands or mountain caves, but walking toward her in the reckless, uniformed arrogance of those who had sworn the same oath to protect and serve. They moved to block her path completely, one stepping close enough that his looming shadow fell across her chest like a dark omen, his voice sharp and commanding with the kind of false authority that small men use when they want to feel powerful. "Show me your ID right now, lady. Don't make this difficult." And though she could have easily reached into her wallet and shown them military credentials that would freeze their blood solid in their veins, federal clearances and identification cards that bore seals reaching all the way to the Oval Office itself, she simply looked at him with those steady, unflinching eyes, the kind of direct, measuring gaze that made battle-hardened soldiers twice his size stammer and swallow their sudden fear. But he, in his ignorance and bloated sense of superiority, took her calm assessment as personal mockery, and his pale lips curled back with growing anger and wounded pride. His partner, a thin man with nervous hands, reached into his utility belt with deliberate slowness, pulling out a pair of electric hair clippers that had no business being part of standard police equipment. An act that was neither lawful procedure nor remotely justified by any regulation in their department manual, but a calculated, degrading act meant specifically to humiliate and shame, meant to shave away her natural hair like slaves had been shorn centuries before, meant to strip away dignity and pride the way racist systems had always tried to break the spirits of proud women of color who refused to bow their heads in submission. And as the clippers buzzed to mechanical life in the humid night air, filling the silence with their menacing electric hum, General Sarah Mitchell did not flinch or retreat even a single step. Though in her disciplined military mind, every old scar from shrapnel, every smoke-filled battlefield where she had crawled through enemy fire to reach wounded soldiers, every solemn funeral where she had folded flags for the families of fallen comrades flashed before her eyes in vivid detail. Not as sources of pain or trauma, but as steel reinforcement, as fire that had hardened her spine into something unbreakable, as proof she had survived worse than this, and would survive whatever came next. When the cold steel teeth of the clippers first touched her scalp, and the first strands of her carefully maintained bun began to fall like dark snow onto the cracked sidewalk beneath her feet, the entire street itself seemed to hold its collective breath, as if the very air understood that they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They had cut into the pride of a decorated warrior, sliced into the honor and dignity of a highly decorated general whose 23 years of silence and service had been her greatest weapon, sharper than any sword, more powerful than any bomb. A passing car slowed dramatically on the road, its bright headlights washing the ugly scene in harsh white light that made everything look like a crime scene photograph. A concerned neighbor cracked open an upstairs window, peering down at the commotion with growing alarm. Worried voices began to whisper urgently from shadowed doorways, and smartphones began to lift and focus, recording this blatant injustice in real time, capturing every humiliating moment for a digital posterity that would soon shake the foundations of the justice system. Yet the three officers laughed among themselves like children pulling wings off flies, completely unaware that the woman standing perfectly still beneath their calculated cruelty was no ordinary target for their racist games, but the very judge, jury, and executioner of their professional fates. Not in some distant courtroom, but in the court of public opinion and historical justice that was already beginning to unfold around them. As the last precious piece of her hair dropped silently to the ground like a fallen soldier, her face remained carved from stone, as immovable and dignified as a monument to resilience. Her jaw was set firm as granite, her dark eyes unblinking and focused, her profound silence screaming louder and more powerfully than any words she could have uttered in that moment of violation. And thou, they believed in their ignorant arrogance that they had successfully humiliated her, stripped her of dignity and pride. They had actually just triggered the massive storm that would systematically unravel their careers, shake their entire police department to its corrupt foundations, and expose the rotting, racist heart of a system that had foolishly dared to lay violent hands on a woman who had once commanded thousands of soldiers in active combat zones across multiple continents. The viral video of the brutal incident spread like wildfire across social media platforms before dawn even broke over the city, bouncing from one outraged phone screen to another, uploaded and re-uploaded and shared until every corner of the internet carried the devastating image of a proud, dignified black woman standing perfectly still while police clippers buzzed around her head, her beautiful hair falling in clumps under the deliberate humiliation. Her face unreadable, yet somehow filled with a quiet, burning fury that millions of viewers immediately recognized as the unshakable strength of someone who had been tested by fire and remained completely unbroken. By morning, hashtags burned like digital flames across every timeline. News anchors spoke with voices thick with urgency and barely controlled outrage, and protesters began gathering outside the police precinct in growing numbers, chanting her name with increasing volume and passion, though most of them still had no idea who she truly was beneath the plain green shirt and calm exterior, completely unaware that they were defending a highly decorated U.S. military general whose service record stretched across decades of sacrifice and heroism that most people could never imagine. Inside her modest two-bedroom home on Maple Street, General Sarah Mitchell sat quietly before her bathroom mirror, running her fingertips slowly in thought, fully across the uneven patches of hair that remained, studying the reflection staring back at her, not as a victim of police brutality, not as someone broken or defeated, but as a seasoned soldier about to enter another kind of battlefield, one where the weapons were legal briefs and public opinion rather than rifles and artillery. Her strong jaw tightened with determination as the growing noise of protest drifted through her open bedroom window, serving as a constant reminder that her personal fight was no longer just her own private battle, but had become tied to every woman, every soldier, every citizen who had ever been degraded and dehumanized by power gone completely unchecked and authority run wild with racist assumptions. Across town, in a greasy all-night diner that smelled of burnt coffee and regret, the three officers sat crowded in a cracked vinyl booth, laughing nervously among themselves and brushing off the growing storm of online outrage as nothing more than meaningless internet noise that would blow over in a few days. They sipped their lukewarm coffee like nothing in the world could touch them, like their badges and union contracts made them untouchable, completely blind to the fact that the woman they had publicly humiliated was not only a decorated military general with connections reaching the highest levels of government, but had already become a powerful symbol of resistance that the entire nation was rapidly rallying behind with increasing fury and determination. And in that willful blindness, in their racist assumption that a black woman couldn't possibly be anyone important or dangerous to their careers, they were unknowingly digging their own professional graves deeper with every ignorant laugh. While General Sarah Mitchell rose from her chair with military precision, squared her broad shoulders with the bearing of someone accustomed to command, and prepared to step back into the world not as a victim seeking pity, but as the living embodiment of justice and accountability that would soon bring all three of them to their knees before the judgment of history. The courthouse was absolutely suffocating with tension on the morning the trial began, as the case that had started as what the department tried to dismiss as a minor incident had spiraled completely out of control into the most explosive and widely watched trial the city had seen in decades. Reporters were jammed shoulder to shoulder like sardines in every available space, cameras flashing like lightning every time the accused officers were escorted through the crowd with faces that somehow still managed to look smug and defiant, expressions that only served to fuel the righteous fury of the massive crowd waiting outside in the street, chanting for justice with voices that shook windows throughout the downtown district. But hidden behind that wall of noise and chaos sat the woman they had shaved, cloaked not yet in her military uniform, but in an aura of silence and perfect composure, watching the entire spectacle unfold with the steady, calculating calm of someone who had led men and women through enemy fire and understood the immense power that comes from patience and strategic thinking. And as witnesses came forward one by one, local shopkeepers who had seen the incident, concerned neighbors who had called for help, even a trembling teenage boy who had filmed the entire event on his phone with hands shaking from nerves and righteous anger. Each piece of testimony layered more crushing weight onto the already massive mountain of evidence that painted the officers not just as careless or poorly trained, but as deliberately cruel and racist in their actions. Though the defense team tried every desperate trick in their legal playbook, from questioning the victim's credibility and character to trying to spin the entire incident as a misunderstood procedure that had been blown out of proportion by social media hysteria, General Sarah Mitchell sat completely unmoved in her chair, her partially shaved head shining beneath the harsh fluorescent courtroom lights like a symbol of both the terrible wound that had been inflicted upon her and the incredible resilience and strength that had allowed her to endure and fight back. Until at last, the judge, clearly weary of all the legal theatrics and desperate defense strategies, called for the victim herself to take the witness stand and tell her story in her own words. And when she rose from her seat with fluid military precision, the entire packed courtroom shifted into a silence so thick and heavy it seemed to physically strangle the breath from every person present. For though most of the spectators and journalists only saw a wronged black woman who had suffered police brutality, she carried herself with the unmistakable bearing and precision of military discipline, each step purposeful and measured, her unwavering gaze focused straight ahead like someone accustomed to command and respect. And when she placed her right hand on the Bible, took the solemn oath to tell the truth, and spoke her full name clearly into the microphone, the entire room jolted as though struck by a massive bolt of electricity, because in that single transformative moment, the veil of anonymity was torn completely away, and the devastating truth stood naked and undeniable before them all. She was not just another civilian victim, not just another black woman who had been humiliated in public by racist police officers, but General Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, a highly decorated United States military general whose distinguished record of service stretched across multiple continents and battlefields, whose uniform chest had once beat, in covered with ribbons and medals for extraordinary valor and leadership under fire. The collective gasp that rippled across the stunned courtroom was nothing compared to the look of absolute horror and dawning realization that slowly spread across the three officers' faces as the full magnitude of their mistake became crystal clear. They had mocked and humiliated someone who now sat in a position to completely dismantle not only their individual careers, but potentially the entire facade of power and protection that their badges and union contracts had provided. And the judge himself faltered visibly, his wooden gavel trembling slightly in his hand as he struggled to maintain order and compose himself, because he too understood immediately that this revelation had transformed the trial from a simple case of police misconduct into a historical reckoning that would echo through headlines and law books for generations to come. As she began to speak, her voice clear and firm, her carefully chosen words painted with all the natural authority that comes from a lifetime of lived sacrifice and earned respect. She did not cry or rage or demand vengeance like they might have expected. Instead, she methodically wove her testimony into a razor-sharp blade of pure truth, slicing through every lie, every weak excuse, every desperate attempt at justification, until the courtroom itself seemed to lean toward her, completely captivated by her dignity and utterly convicted by her words. And though she concluded her testimony with no dramatic demand for revenge or punishment, only a simple, powerful request for justice and accountability, the heavy silence that followed felt more profound and meaningful than any shouted verdict could have been, because everyone present understood that the scales of justice had shifted forever, and there could be no going back to the way things were be. Farce. The day of the verdict dawned like a massive storm system waiting to break over the entire city. The courthouse was completely surrounded by crowds so vast and determined that the streets had become rivers of humanity. Every hand-lettered sign, every passionate chant, every tear-stained face in that sea of protesters demanding that the justice system finally prove it was more than just empty promises and broken dreams. And inside the courthouse, the tension was a living, breathing thing that seemed coiled around the rafters and pressing down with crushing weight on every soul present, from the sweating defense team whispering hollow, desperate reassurances to their doomed clients, to the exhausted journalists clutching notepads with hands that shook from too much coffee and too little sleep, to the jury members who had been sequestered for weeks with the enormous weight of history pressing against their collective conscience like a physical force. Then the heavy oak doors opened with dramatic finality, and she entered the courtroom one final time, but no longer as the humiliated woman they had once mocked on a dark street corner, not even as the dignified witness who had stunned the world with her revelation, but as the living, breathing embodiment of strength and justice itself. She was dressed now in her full United States military general's dress uniform, the chest gleaming with an impressive display of ribbons, stars, and medals that spoke eloquently of deserts crossed under enemy fire, wars fought with distinction and honor, lives saved through courage and quick thinking, and a level of discipline and dedication that few men or women alive could ever hope to claim or understand. Her very presence seemed to draw all the oxygen out of the packed room, and the shaved half of her head, now grown out slightly but still clearly visible as it contrasted starkly against the longer black strands falling over the other side, had become its own powerful emblem of resilience and strength, simultaneously a scar that marked her suffering and a crown that celebrated her unbreakable spirit. And as she took her seat and sat watching the three officers squirm uncomfortably under the intense glare of public scrutiny, their once arrogant and smug faces now pale and sagging with the dread of men who finally understood the consequences of their actions, the judge rose slowly from his elevated bench, his voice quivering with emotion as he prepared to read the verdict that would change everything. Each word cracked through the air like thunder. Guilty. 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 The three verdicts repeated until the very air seemed ablaze with gasps of relief and tears of joy, and the sound of hundreds of fists pounding against wooden benches in triumphant celebration echoed through the building like a drumbeat of justice finally served. Outside, the roar of the people was so loud and sustained that it literally shook the windows of the courthouse, a sound that could probably be heard for miles in every direction. Yet perhaps the most powerful and moving sight of all was not the three shackled officers being led away by bailiffs, their heads finally bowed in disgrace and shame, but General Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell herself standing tall and proud at attention, raising her right hand in a crisp military salute toward the American flag that hung above the judge's bench. It was not a salute of blind patriotism or naive loyalty, but a declaration that the ideals of freedom and justice must be fought for and defended at home just as fiercely as they are defended abroad, that the oath she had taken as a soldier applied to every street corner and every interaction between those who serve and those they are sworn to protect. In that single, perfect moment, she became something far more than a victim, far more than a survivor of police brutality. She became a living testament to what it truly means to endure the worst, so that hatred can offer, to resist oppression in all its forms, to rise again even when stripped of dignity and pride, because true dignity and real pride do not reside in hair or uniforms or external symbols, but in the absolutely unbreakable fire of the human spirit that refuses to be extinguished no matter what forces try to snuff it out. As she stepped outside into the thunderous applause of thousands, the massive sea of people parted like waves before her, creating a path of honor and respect. Children reached out desperately to touch her hand as she passed. Veterans of foreign wars saluted with tears streaming down their weathered faces, and mothers whispered her name to their wide-eyed daughters as if they were passing down a sacred prayer or blessing that would protect and inspire future generations. And though she spoke very few words to the crowd, her dignified silence somehow roared louder than any speech could have, her measured walk across the courthouse steps becoming a march of victory that etched itself permanently into the collective memory of a nation hungry for real heroes and genuine justice. Everyone who witnessed that moment understood instinctively that this was not just her personal story of triumph over adversity. This was the story of centuries of silenced voices finally rising, of systematic injustice finally being confronted head-on, of truth revealed in its rawest, most undeniable and powerful form. As the cameras captured her final glance, back at the courthouse where justice had finally been served, the faint trace of a satisfied smile on her once stern face hinted not at revenge or bitterness, but at vindication and hope, because she had successfully transformed her deepest humiliation into a weapon of positive change that would benefit countless others. The echoes of that historic day would ripple outward across laws and policies and human hearts for generations to come, serving as an eternal reminder that no act of cruelty, no abuse of power, no arrogant laugh from a man with clippers could ever erase or diminish the legacy of a woman who stood unbroken before an unjust system and forced it to bow before her truth.